All right, Nate. We're good. We're going to start now. If you could share your presentation, we should be.
Alrighty, let me do this.
All right.
Let's see.
Hi. I'm going to introduce you for a little bit. Bueno, chicos, acá tenemos al gran Nate Williams. Les pido un aplauso para nuestro expositor. We're applauding you, Nate. Él nos va a contar un poquito de su trabajo, su estilo, cómo él desarrolla sus ilustraciones. Él nos va a ir hablando en inglés y yo voy a ir traduciendo cada cierto rato. Al final vamos a tener algunas preguntas, algún espacio para que puedan hacer preguntas, etcétera, que va a moderar la profe Tama, que se está escapando en este momento. Así. All right. Whenever you want to start presenting.
Okay. Can you see my screen okay?
It's loading right now.
Okay.
It says you're sharing, but it's not loading. All right. Yeah, we'll see like your whole screen right now.
So you can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we can see like all your menus and stuff on the side.
Oh, you can. That's interesting.
I think you need to.
Okay.
It's still showing your whole thing.
Okay, I think I gotta share it a different way. So let me try this.
All right. Ten un par de segundos, chico.
Share screen, and let me try doing this. Okay, and
all right, starting to share. All right, yeah, we're good. So whenever, yeah, just go for it and just stop every few sentences so I can translate.
Okay. Well, hello everybody. Thanks for inviting me to talk. This is a huge honor. I always love connecting with people, so I love doing these type of things. I'm Nate. And today I'm going to be talking about illustration. But I do a lot of other things besides illustration. I work sometimes as a creative director, as an art director, as a designer, artist, illustrator. I do a lot of different things. But really what I care about is really just collaborating on ideas and bringing them to life. So whatever title you want to give that, this is what I really like to do. So I'll stop here so you can translate.
All right, awesome. Bueno, está muy honrado de estar acá. Nate agradece su presencia y su interés. Básicamente, él trabaja como ilustrador, ha sido director de arte, ha trabajado en muchas partes de lo que es el rubro de ilustración, pero a él realmente, como bien dice la presentación, lo que le interesa es tomar una idea y llevarla a la vida a través de la ilustración. Go for it.
Okay. So just to give you an idea, I'm from the Western United States, and I grew up in two different, very different areas. So I grew up in California and Utah, and my parents were divorced. So I lived with my mom, and then I'd go visit my dad. And at a young age, I realized how different the world was just because I was going between these different places.
Bueno, él nos cuenta que él es del área oeste de Estados Unidos y que debido al divorcio de sus papás, él se movía mucho entre Salt Lake y California, lo cual le daba distintas perspectivas sobre la vida o cómo la gente vivía la vida en distintas partes de Estados Unidos.
Yeah, and the reason I tell you this is because this kind of formed my worldview very young, is realizing how different the world was and how interested I was in kind of seeing different places. So Utah it's very mountainous. It's very pretty. There's rivers, there's lakes. Some people might think it's boring. Other people might think it's very pretty. But it's very kind of nature based.
Bueno, el tener que vivir en distintas partes le generó un interés de saber cómo vivían otras personas, ya que él experimentó distintas cosas y él, viviendo en Utah, siente que muchas personas tienen distintas perspectivas sobre el mismo lugar. Algunos dicen que es fome, dicen que es aburrido, pero otras personas dicen que es hermoso y que tiene diferentes cosas para disfrutar. Entonces, eso ya le daba atisbos de cómo la gente vivía de distintas maneras el mismo lugar.
Yeah. And then California is very urban. It's very like there's a huge punk rock and skateboard culture. There's like little towns of different cultures, so it has a lot of different cultures. Has a lot of crime, but it's very kind of more urban.
Y otro lado de la misma moneda era cuando él estaba en Los Ángeles, donde había una contracultura mucho mayor, había una escena de punk muy grande, había harto crimen. Entonces, eso le daba una perspectiva completamente distinta a cómo se vivía en el otro lado de Estados Unidos.
Yeah, so this isn't Los Angeles. This is like more San Francisco area, but yeah, it's California.
Es más San Francisco que Los Ángeles.
Yeah. So my personal philosophy has really been around kind of curiosity, play, and discovery. And as I've gotten older, I've kind of added a couple other things to this, which is really kind of empathy and gratitude. So this is kind of my personal philosophy that I really adhere to.
Bueno, toda su filosofía artística la basa en estos tres conceptos, que es curiosidad, juego y descubrimiento, pero a medida que ha ido siendo mayor, ha agregado los conceptos de empatía y gratitud. Y esa es la base de donde él parte todo su trabajo gráfico.
Yeah, so curiosity is really important, and these are some values I really try to instill in my children. I think that this just makes you engaged in the world. It makes you have questions, and when you have questions, you tend to seek answers. So I think it's one of the most valuable traits a person can have.
Bueno, él dice que la curiosidad es algo que trata de inculcar mucho en sus hijos y que es algo que es vital para la vida de todas las personas, de que nos lleva a la exploración.
Yeah, and then play is really important because that's when you start to investigate and you kind of come to your own conclusions and you have questions. Why are the things the way they are? And I think that humans have discovered so much without trying to discover it, but because they have this playful nature, they have this curious nature, we discover a lot of amazing things through play.
Bueno, básicamente después de tener la curiosidad, empezar a jugar con lo que uno encuentra, ha llevado a la humanidad a muchos descubrimientos que llegan porque, o sea, sin la intención de haberlos encontrado, ¿ya? Sino que a través del juego también podemos encontrar muchas cosas valiosas.
Yeah, so some things are useful, some things aren't, but I think it just makes life better. And so this is kind of how I approach a lot of different things.
Y bueno, el descubrimiento hace que nos mejora la vida, ya nos informa la vida y hace que la vida sea mejor.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about my influences and I'll talk a little bit about my work. So I'm very dyslexic. Completely dyslexic. So as a very young kid, this is how I would kind of see the words. Like I saw them more as letters more as objects and less as words. So on the left is like hola, and on the right is kind of how I saw it as a young kid.
Bueno, básicamente nos va a hablar un poquito de su influencia y una de las mayores influencias en su vida ha sido su dislexia y como él veía gráficamente las palabras al leerlas, porque a la izquierda es como uno ve la palabra hola normalmente, pero a la derecha es mucho más parecido a como él la percibía debido a su condición.
Yep. So that was a huge influence because I was dyslexic, I always kind of gravitated towards visual things more than written things. So I think that's where I kind of, gravitated towards art.
Bueno, la dislexia, siendo que él veía todas las palabras escritas más como imágenes, lo hizo acercarse mucho más al arte, ya que todo lo llevaba a imágenes más que a palabras escritas.
Yep. And then in college, I studied mixed media sculpture. That was my emphasis. And there was an artist called Marisol Escobar. And she was a huge influence to me. So a lot of my influences, it's not that I particularly like their work, but it's more that they really made me realize things I didn't realize before. So the thing that I realized with her is I realized that you can mix 2D and you can mix 3D. You can do stuff that's very graphic, in sculpture. So this was like a huge realization for me.
Y bueno, cuando estudió arte, él estudió escultura y encontró el trabajo de esta artista que se llama Marisol Escobar, y se dio cuenta que no necesariamente le tenían que gustar gráficamente las cosas para que le llamaran la atención. Y lo que él le llamó la atención del trabajo de esta persona es cómo llevaba las cosas que estaban en 2 dimensiones a una tercera dimensión.
And so another artist was a Dr. Seuss. So he's a child artist, a children's book artist. And the thing that he made me realize is like when I saw anything that he represented in a different way. Like he drew a tree. I never saw a tree represented like that. He drew a cloud. I never saw a cloud represented like that. So he also made me realize you can represent things in very abstract, unique ways.
Y bueno, otra de sus grandes influencias es el Dr. Seuss, ¿ya? Que es escritor y dibujante de libros infantiles, y lo que él lo hizo pensar fue que la manera en que él representaba las cosas no era como estaban en la realidad. Entonces eso lo hizo pensar en que él podía representar las cosas no de una manera realista, sino de una manera que se entendiera, pero que no fuera como es en la realidad.
Yeah. And so another person that was hugely influential is David Carson. So he really made a difference in the 90s with graphic design. And his graphic design was just so out there that, I mean, now it's more common, but at the time it looked like it came off of from a different planet. But he just did stuff that you never realized you could do. So he put a barcode right in the middle of a magazine. If you know about branding and stuff like that, he would change the logo of the magazine. So he just kind of turned everything upside down and made me realize all the stuff you could do.
Otra persona que lo influenció mucho es el diseñador gráfico David Parsons, el cual en los 90 revolucionó el diseño gráfico. Ustedes ven los diseños que están acá y que hoy en día pueden verse comunes, pero en el momento fue muy, muy rupturista, lo cual lo hizo ver las cosas de distinta manera por cómo él tomaba elementos que no se ocupaban de ciertas maneras y lo llevaba de una manera no tradicional, como por ejemplo llevar un código de barras y ponerlo en el medio de una página, cosa que antes no se había visto.
And then I think this is my last influence that I'm putting in this slide, but this guy, his name was Dan Eldon, and he was just a very adventurous guy that traveled all over Africa, and he did photojournalism and he did art books, but I really admired his how brave he was, and he was actually killed in Somalia at the age of 22. But I just loved his adventurous spirit, and he's really the reason why I have traveled so much, because I saw one of his books and it just made me very curious about the world.
Y la última influencia que quiero nombrar es un fotógrafo que se llama Dan Eldon. Él viajó por todo el mundo y le llamó mucho la atención lo valiente que era a la hora de ir a sacar fotos. Él falleció hace unos años en África, pero su influencia más allá del arte fue que lo llevó a viajar mucho porque él también quería experimentar cosas como las que había fotografiado Dan Eldon.
This is another one. So another thing is I really just love kind of art of the street and of the people, and art from people that aren't artists. I feel like they have a unique perspective. And I like the thing I like about graffiti is because it's a mix of different artists. Like one person puts one thing, another person puts another thing. And some stuff's vulgar, some stuff's beautiful. And I like that kind of mix of all these things together.
Y le llama mucho también la atención el arte que generan personas que no son artistas con formación. Y lo ve mucho en el arte urbano, le llama mucho la atención el graffiti, ya que la pieza de graffiti se convierte en una pieza comunitaria, donde una persona pone algo y otra persona pone algo encima, que puede ir de lo vulgar a lo hermoso, lo cual hace que las perspectivas de distintas personas estén unidas de una manera bastante interesante.
So I do this with my own artwork. I kind of do graffiti with my own artwork, whereas I'll create something at one time and then I'll create something else 6 months later and it will look very different. And I like mixing the things together because there are like different time periods, different styles, and I like doing that with my own artwork.
Y a él le gusta tratar de imitar lo mismo del arte urbano en su propio trabajo, donde él dibuja algo y después no vuelve a eso hasta 6 meses después, cuando ya está dibujando de manera distinta, lo cual hace que distintos periodos de tiempo se unan en una misma pieza gráfica, haciéndola más interesante.
Good. So I worked for Microsoft for over 10 years. I've worked at a lot of different corporations. So outside of art and illustration, I do a lot with creative direction and art direction. And my art was really a response to working in these very corporate environments.
Bueno, él ha trabajado mucho tiempo en Microsoft como director de arte, no solamente generando piezas gráficas, y su arte ha sido mucho una respuesta a tener que trabajar en estos espacios de trabajo bastante más regimentados, bastante más formales.
Yep. So, one of my jobs at Microsoft was to design basically websites for lots of different games. I was the first art director on Xbox.com. And so I worked a lot with this very kind of 3D rendered, high fidelity type of artwork.
Bueno, uno de los trabajos que él hizo durante mucho tiempo en Microsoft era generar páginas web para videojuegos. Él fue el primer director de arte cuando salió la Xbox. Entonces a él le tocaba trabajar con muchos modelos 3D muy rendereados, muy llevados al realismo.
Yep. And another thing is Microsoft is very strategic. Like they understand their consumers, and everything they do is through focus groups, and they do a lot of calculated risk. So everything's very strategic and intentional.
Y bueno, todo lo que hace Microsoft lo hace a través de focus groups y de encuestas a personas que utilizan sus productos, lo cual todos los riesgos que toman son bastante calculados y son bastante llevados a un público específico.
So this had a huge influence on my artwork, because when I got off of work, I wanted to do the exact opposite. I wanted to do stuff that was very handmade, very analog and spontaneous, not strategic at all. Like I wanted to just do whatever I thought and not have a plan and then execute it.
Entonces, todo su arte posterior a trabajar a Microsoft fue una respuesta a eso, donde él quería ser más libre, quería llevar, que se viera más la impronta personal, que él quería llevar más que algo tan estudiado como lo que se realizaba en Microsoft.
Yeah, so this was kind of a mix of my things that interested in me, which is I've always had an interest in Latin culture. I grew up in California, where there's a huge Latin culture presence. And I also had people that I worked with that would teach me different sayings. So before I ever went to a Spanish-speaking country, I would start to incorporate kind of Spanish words into my artwork because I was really fascinated by it.
Y bueno, ahí él menciona la influencia que tuvo el vivir en California, donde él estuvo rodeado de mucha gente latinoamericana. Le llamaba mucho la atención la cultura latinoamericana y él empezó a integrar palabras o frases latinoamericanas dentro de su arte, ya que le llamaba mucho la atención.
So at this time period was when this was happening, at the same time my mom died from ovarian cancer. So my mom was a huge influence in my life. She was a very unique person. I loved her so much. And she died at this time.
Y bueno, en esa época su mamá falleció de cáncer, ¿ya? Y ella fue una de las mayores influencias que él tenía durante su vida fuera de lo que es el arte, y esto afectó mucho su arte también.
Yeah, so this kind of made me realize that life is very short. Like if you want to do something, you should do it, because you never know when you're going to die. So by my mom dying made me realize I've always wanted to live in another country. I've always wanted to see what the world was like. So even though I had a lot of good things going for me, I was young. I had a great job. I had a house. I decided to basically, get rid of all that so I could kind of see the world. So I sold my house and I moved to South America.
Y bueno, el fallecimiento de su mamá lo hizo darse cuenta que la vida es muy corta y que si había algo que él quería hacer, lo tenía que hacer ahora. Entonces, aunque él tenía un trabajo, tenía una casa y todo eso, él renunció a su trabajo, vendió su casa y se fue a vivir a Sudamérica porque era algo que le llamaba mucho la atención.
So I traveled all over. I went to Spain and Costa Rica and a lot of different places, and I've met a lot of cool people. And I ended up in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And then I also stayed for a month in Chile as well.
Y bueno, él empezó a viajar por Sudamérica, estuvo mucho tiempo en Buenos Aires, conoció a mucha gente, ¿ya? Y incluso estuvo en Santiago.
And I feel like everything just became interesting. The cool thing about going to a different place is everything's done a little differently. So you start to notice everything. So stuff that seemed like mundane in the US was very interesting. So like, I remember it when I was in Argentina and I saw a bunch of cars with water on top of them, which I didn't know what that meant. Like I had all these reasons of what could that mean? And it was very interesting, but to someone who lived there, that was just a basic way of saying this car is for sale.
Bueno, y viniendo a otro país, a otra cultura, se da cuenta de las pequeñas diferencias, lo que hace que las cosas que son mundanas o del día a día para la gente que vive ahí, para él se le hacían muy, muy interesantes. Como por ejemplo, distintos carteles, bidones de agua que se ponían arriba de los autos y él no sabía por qué lo veía en todas partes y eso, la gente sabía que ese auto significa que está a la venta, pero a él le llamaba mucho la atención esa idiosincrasia ya que nunca la había visto.
Yeah. So it's very humbling when you go to a different country, because in your own country, you know how to do things very well and you know how to navigate society. And I knew how to do that very well in the United States. But when I went to South America, I remember being jealous of this bird because this bird was saying stuff in Spanish that I didn't understand.
Bueno, él nos habla que cuando uno vive en un país específico donde nació o donde ha vivido mucho tiempo, ya conoce la idiosincrasia, conoce cómo moverse socialmente, y lo cual hace que cuando uno se vaya a otro país con otro idioma, uno se siente mucho más desprotegido y mucho más fuera de lugar. Y él conoció a este pájaro, el cual le daba mucha envidia, porque el pájaro sabía palabras en castellano que él no sabía.
Yeah, and so then I also went to Costa Rica. So I was from the United States. It's very high tech, but I was at the epicenter. So I worked in some of the most high tech stuff. So I worked at Microsoft. We were working on stuff way before it reached the general population. And then I moved to Costa Rica, where I would literally have to take an hour bus ride to upload a file, and then take an hour bus ride back. So it was a very big change.
Nos cuenta sobre el contraste entre vivir en California, donde él trabajaba en Microsoft, donde todo es de la última tecnología y todo súper rápido, súper moderno, a irse a Costa Rica, donde él cuando quería mandar un archivo a alguna parte tenía que tomar un bus de 1 hora para llegar al lugar donde podía mandar el archivo y después 1 hora de vuelta para llegar a su casa.
Yeah, so let me talk about illustration for a bit. So illustration is amazing. Illustration is absolutely my favorite thing of all of creative. Art, I would say art and illustration. So I've done a lot of different jobs, and I know a lot of people in very high positions, and a lot of them, if all they could do is make art, they would.
Bueno, lo que a él más le gusta es el arte de la ilustración, es lo que más admira, lo que más disfruta, y se da cuenta de que mucha gente con mucho poder o con mucha influencia, si ellos pudieran, lo único que querrían hacer es ilustrar.
So when I started off, I decided hey, I want to make art and I want to do illustration. So I started doing illustrations, and I would do it for very small magazines for barely any money. So these are some of my first illustrations, doing them for editorial magazines.
Y bueno, él empezó haciendo ilustraciones editoriales para revistas muy pequeñas donde apenas le pagaban, y estos son algunos de los primeros trabajos que hizo.
And then I also do other stuff where I would do my own projects. So I would make silkscreen posters and little booklets and sell those as well.
Y bueno, él también hacía libros propios, serigrafiados, como pequeños cómics, pequeños libros, ¿ya? Y que él los vendía de persona a persona.
And because I did that, some bigger companies started to notice me. So this Converse was my first big job where I actually got paid pretty well. And I was like, wow, I could actually do this as a living. So this kind of made me realize this is something I could actually do.
Y su propio trabajo llevó a que lo notaran distintas compañías. Su primer gran cliente fue Converse, los cuales le pagaron muy bien por hacer esta campaña. Y ahí él se dio cuenta que quizás podría vivir de hacer las ilustraciones que él quería.
Yeah, and so once you start doing work for bigger companies, other companies start to notice. So then other companies would hire me. So this is for a pretty good company in the States called Urban Outfitters, where they do all these kind of fun products. And so this is something they hired me to do.
Y una vez que uno trabaja para una compañía grande, otras compañías empiezan a notar el trabajo de él, y otra compañía grande para la que él trabajó es Urban Outfitters, para el que hizo este tipo de cosas como estos cojines.
Yeah, and it just kept on going to other stuff. So as I did more work, I got more work. This is for a coffee company.
Just give a second. I think it's slowing down. Okay. Y bueno, esto es una ilustración que hizo para una empresa de café, ya que también después de trabajar en Urban Outfitters lo siguieron notando otras empresas y salieron trabajos como este.
Yeah, so and the reason I'm showing this is it's really just that when you do stuff, it leads to more stuff. So it's kind of like it's like a snowball effect of as you get more work, it gives you more work. And as you like when I did a lot of creative direction and art direction, I didn't do as much illustration, and then I got a lot less illustration. So it's kind of a thing. If you do it, you get more of it, and if you don't do it, it kind of fades away.
Y básicamente él dice que mientras uno más haga ilustración, más trabajo de ilustración aparece. Si uno deja de hacer trabajos, la gente deja de verlo y deja de darlo. Entonces, si uno se mantiene activo, es más fácil seguir trabajando.
Yep. So another big part of my work was really, at the time, it was a little bit more unique. So I really got into like hand lettering and things like that around like 2006, 2007. And at the time, it was a little bit more unique. And some of this was probably because my influence growing up, like I would see movie posters, see cereal boxes, and then being dyslexic, I just really noticed like lettering in general.
Y bueno, otra cosa que a él le interesa mucho es hacer lettering a mano, ya que muchas de sus influencias vienen de pósters de películas o de packagings de cereales que eran muy coloridos, ya que él, por su dislexia, veía todas estas cosas como imágenes más que como letras. Esto lo empezó a hacer en el 2006, 2007, donde no se hacía tanto, hoy en día es más común, pero en la época era bastante innovador.
Yeah, so I started doing that, and this was just something I started to do, and then because I called it lettering, all of a sudden I would start getting jobs that wanted lettering, so it was pretty simple of just giving it a name, and then people would hire me to do it.
Y bueno, básicamente lo empezó a llamar lettering y al ponerle un nombre, la gente como que empezó a entender lo que era y le empezó a pedir pegas de lettering. Era como, ya, tú haces eso. Okay.
Yeah, so these are some different things. And one of the cool things about illustration is you learn about so many cool topics because stuff that you would never pursue on your own, you get a job and then you actually become interested in it. So this was for an East African author where I did his book, some of his book covers.
Y bueno, él nos menciona que la ilustración lo ha llevado a descubrir cosas, y que lo encuentra interesante la ilustración, a descubrir cosas que a él nunca hubiera explorado. ¿Ya? Y, por ejemplo, le tocó hacer estas portadas para libros de un escritor que es de África del Este, lo cual lo llevó a aprender sobre muchos temas que él no conocía.
Yeah, and so another thing that I really like about illustration is everybody understands it. I've worked on some very technical things like augmented reality and mixed reality and virtual reality and AI and different things like that. But the thing that's great about illustration is everyone understands the image. So no matter if someone's old or young or speaks a different language, it's something that people connect with.
Él nos cuenta que lo que le gusta de la ilustración es que todo el mundo puede entender la ilustración, que él ha trabajado en muchos entornos con tecnología, inteligencia artificial, software, lo cual, y que puede ser más complejo, pero cuando uno le muestra una ilustración a alguien, da lo mismo la edad, da lo mismo el género, da lo mismo su procedencia, la gente lo entiende mucho más rápido.
Yep. So another thing I do is I illustrate under a different name. So I illustrate under a different name called Alexander Blue. And that's because in my one style, I feel like it doesn't do everything that I want it to do. I have this other stuff where I like to do books for kids and very kind of young audiences. So I invented this other personality to kind of do stuff under that name.
Y bueno, él también le interesaba mucho hacer libros infantiles, pero él pensaba que su estilo no se ajustaba tanto, o el estilo por el que él era conocido no se ajustaba tanto a ese tipo de libros. Por ende, creó este seudónimo de Alexander Blue, lo que le permite hacer trabajos que normalmente no realizaría con el estilo con el que es más conocido normalmente.
Yeah, so the image on the right is actually a toy that a friend and I manufactured. So a lot of my projects start off with illustration, but they actually turn into other things. So we've started companies that are toys and stickers and things like that, and web apps and different things like that. But a lot of it starts off with just illustration.
Y bueno, el trabajo de ilustración también lo ha llevado a desarrollar otros de sus intereses, como es el desarrollo de juguetes, que es la imagen que tenemos acá a la derecha, que son juguetes autoproducidos por él y por un amigo, y que si bien están en otro formato, tienen otro uso, todo nace desde la ilustración.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the creative process. So
I think.
One of the very first things I think is important before you even do an illustration job, it's just like you'll have more ideas if you do some of these things, you know? So I always keep a notebook in my pocket, and I draw every day, like when I have a coffee, and it's really just intended that once you start doing it, you just have more and more ideas. So I think notebooks are like, I just get these little small notebooks that I carry in my pocket, and it's not about doing something well, it's just about having ideas.
Ya, él dice que uno de los ejercicios que más le sirve a la hora de generar ilustraciones y tener más ideas, él siempre anda con una libreta y está tratando de dibujar y bajar sus pensamientos a imágenes durante todo el momento, que mientras más se haga esto, más fácil se hace el proceso de ilustración, ya que al dibujar de manera suelta o de manera más relajada, de manera más rápida, las ideas fluyen un poquito más fácil.
Yeah, so I think as an artist, it's really important to get out of the mindset that you have to create something good. I think what you do is you create, and some of it's good, some of it's not, but it's more important that you're just creating, and then a lot of things will lead to other things.
Sorry, we didn't catch that.
Okay.
The signal kind of cut out.
Yeah, so I would say the purpose of a notebook is that you just become, you don't become so precious with your work. You're not always trying to create something great. What you're doing is you're just creating, and some stuff's good and some stuff's bad. But by doing that, it will lead to more good stuff. Does that make sense?
Está diciendo básicamente que el hacer estos bocetos sueltos, el hacer estos bocetos más rápido, da lo mismo si son buenos o no. Ya las cosas buenas se pueden rescatar, pero hay que perderle miedo a tratar de hacer todo perfecto, lo lleva a tener más ideas ya que a ser más creativo.
Another thing that's really has an impact on me is changing my environment. So whenever I brainstorm about a project or an idea, I always try to change my environment. And when I was living in Buenos Aires, I would just get on a bus. I didn't even know where the bus was going to go, but I knew that if I stayed on it long enough, it would bring me back to the same spot. And I would use this as a way to brainstorm ideas. I just like ride the bus, listen to music, look out the window, and I'd have different ideas. So changing your environment's really important.
Ok, voy a traducir lo que he escuchado. Básicamente, lo que él nos habla es que el cambiar sus alrededores le ayuda mucho en temas de inspiración. Cuando él vivía en Buenos Aires, él se subía a un bus que ni siquiera sabía hacia dónde iba y veía a la gente, escuchaba la música y eso lo llevaba a un lugar creativo distinto, lo cual lo ayudaba cada vez que tenía que brainstorm para algún proyecto.
Another thing is doing stuff outside of art and illustration. So I think usually when someone creates something unique, it's usually whatever that thing is plus something else. So if you think of like, I don't know what the famous properties in Chile would be, but a lot of stuff is because they bring something unique to it. So I think it's very important to basically have interests outside of art and illustration that make you have a unique perspective. So whether that's through books or podcasts or talking with people or traveling or YouTube, it's always good to kind of constantly have an interest outside of art.
Y básicamente dice que es muy importante tener intereses y estímulos fuera del arte, ya sean películas, sean libros, sean relaciones personales, ya lo cual uno trae a la ilustración y eso la nutre y la lleva a un lugar más creativo y más innovador.
How are we doing on time? Should I speed it up or is this pace okay?
No. Okay, everyone that's supposed to be here is not here right now. I think you have like 10 minutes or something like that.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm just going to go through a basic job. So a lot of times when a company contacts me, they usually have something they specifically like. Like I would say 90% of the time they're referencing something they really like and they want something similar for what their project is.
Básicamente, cuando él trabaja con cualquier cliente, el cliente quiere algo que le recuerde lo que les gusta. Entonces, cualquier cosa que ellos quieran que él desarrolle, les traen algún tipo de referencia para incluirla dentro del proyecto.
Yeah, so my objective is not to recreate something I've already recreated. And a lot of times the client wants that because it's like it's safe. But what I really try to do is through references, like a lot of times they'll give me like 3 or 4 references. I try to understand what do they like about this, you know? And a lot of times it's not that they really want this, but they want it because it's simple. They want it because it's colorful. They want it because it's like for a certain reason. So references really help me understand what is it that they really resonates with them.
Ya, y cuando un cliente le entrega una referencia, lo que el cliente se imagina que quiere es que quiere lo mismo, pero hecho otra vez, ya, lo cual es demasiado seguro. Entonces, lo que a él le gusta es tratar de tomar la referencia y entender por qué al cliente le llama la atención esa referencia. Y tratar de encontrar otras referencias que hagan eco de eso para poder integrarlas y hacer algo que le guste al cliente, pero que no sea copiar lo mismo que ya está.
And then a lot of times, you go from very low fidelity stuff where you can make a lot of it and you give them different options, so these are just examples of rough. And whether this is illustration or creative direction or art direction, this is how I always try to do. I try to make the very beginning very low fidelity that you can produce a lot of ideas. And then over time, you get to higher fidelity.
Bueno, básicamente su proceso empieza con bocetos no muy detallados, ya de los cuales puede sacar rápido, puede hacer varios y eventualmente esto lleva a una pieza más desarrollada de acuerdo a los requerimientos del cliente.
And so usually they would choose like an ill thing. And I always color is a pretty big important thing. So even though I do a final, this is pretty much how it's going to look. I always give color options because that's a pretty powerful thing that a lot of clients tend to like to tweak a little bit.
Y bueno, el color es muy importante dentro de su trabajo. Entonces, una vez que eligen uno de los bocetos que él propone, él hace varias opciones de color para ver cuál comunica de la mejor manera.
All right. All right. So what I'm going to talk about is all I did was illustration for 10 years. So I didn't do any art direction or creative direction for a while. And then I came back to it. So about like 9 years ago, I said, I want to get back into art direction and creative direction and live in the United States and spend time with my dad. My dad was getting older. So after doing 10 years of art, I re-entered in the corporate world, and I just want to kind of talk a little bit about that.
Y bueno, después de 10 años de viajar, vivir en otros países, él quiso volver a Estados Unidos para estar con su papá, que ya se estaba poniendo más viejo, y entró de nuevo al mundo corporativo a trabajar.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go through a bunch of stuff. So I do stuff that's very different than illustration. And I'll go through some of that. Illustration always helps me because it helps me articulate ideas and convince people of why we should pursue an idea. But I do a lot of stuff outside of that, and I just want to kind of go through that real quickly.
Ya, él nos va a hablar un poco de todo el trabajo que hace fuera de lo que es el mundo corporativo, ¿ya? De manera breve. O sea, para el mundo corporativo, pero no ilustración.
Okay, so there's a bunch of corporate stuff. It's good, it pays the bills, but it's not my passion, It's really just to make a living.
Y si bien todas esas cosas que pasaron ahora es trabajo corporativo que paga súper bien, pues no es lo que a él le interesa, pero sí le permite vivir de cierta manera.
Yeah, But it's a reality. We can't always do only what we want to do, and sometimes you got to do this other stuff, and you can have fun doing it. But my real passion is illustration. So one of the things my grandpa told me is don't get good at things you don't want to do.
Una de las cosas que he aprendido y que se la dijo su abuelo cuando era chico es que si bien puede hacer muchas cosas, no trates de ser bueno en cosas que no te interesan o que no quieres hacer.
And it's very easy to do because the world has needs and it wants you to do these things. But over time, you'll do that for just a year, and the next thing you know, it's 10 years, and then that's all you know how to do. And it's really an opportunity cost because you're really not doing what you truly want to do.
Y es súper fácil caer en eso porque el mundo tiene necesidades y uno puede acostumbrarse de manera muy rápida a hacer cosas que le resultan, que le salen bien, pero que no es la pasión de uno. Y de repente decía, o lo voy a hacer por un año y pasan 10 años y es lo único que sabía hacer. Entonces hay que tratar de evitar caer en esos ciclos.
Yeah. So I'm not idealistic. I know that we have to do some stuff we don't want to do, but it's the main point is don't lose sight of what really makes you feel alive and what you're passionate about.
Dice que es muy importante no perder de vista qué es lo que nos apasiona, qué es lo que nos hace sentir vivos. Si bien es súper importante poder pagar las cuentas y vivir día a día, ya no hay que perder de vista la pasión.
Yeah, so the main thing is that like life goes by really quickly. Like I when I was young, older people would always say this to me, how fast time goes. And now I'm at the age where I realize that's so true. And it's really just living your life with purpose. So a lot of times you can live your life on autopilot and things just happen, or you can really have a clear idea of what you want to do and then keep that top of mind.
Entonces es súper importante tener claro lo que uno quiere hacer en la vida, cuál es el propósito, porque la vida es súper corta. Como que él decía cuando él era joven, todas las personas más viejas le decían, oye, la vida pasa súper rápido, él decía, no. Y ahora se da cuenta que el tiempo es muy corto, que vivir, como bien dice la lámina, con propósito y haciendo lo que uno hace.
Yeah, so what I realized, like I'll still do other types of jobs and I'll do what I need to do in different situations, but my real passion is very clear. It's connecting with people, it's making art, it's having a good impact on my community and society, and then it's basically raising awesome children that have these good values that will do the same.
Y bueno, él trata de llevar sus valores a sus hijos para tratar de perpetuar todas estas cosas que él aprendió y las cosas que él valora. Trata de influenciar a sus hijos de esa manera en lo que ellos van a hacer a futuro.
Yeah, so lately I've been taking a time to reinvest in this type of stuff. So I wrote this book in 2012, and my son, he's half Latin and half white, you know, like and he goes to a school that's very, very, very white and everything. And even though they treat him well, he realizes he's different. And so it made me realize like this is a good book I need to write right now to make kids like him and other kids feel better kind of about the situation. So this is really a children's book that kind of talks about empathy and acceptance and the value of being different.
Y bueno, él tiene un hijo de raza mixta, él es latino y estadounidense y va a un colegio con puros niños blancos y él, si bien lo trataban bien, sentía que era súper distinto, entonces él escribió este libro para concientizar y generar empatía en todo el mundo sobre la gente que es distinta, y cómo acogerlos y cómo hacerlos ver que todos a la larga somos iguales y tenemos valor.
So Hola Amiga I started this project out a long time ago, and it's something that I continue to do, but it's really a response to a corporate environment. And you can read the description, kind of the objective of it.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
Oh yeah, so yeah, Hola Amiga is like a project I started a long time ago, but it's a project that I still use to basically kind of do stuff outside of the corporate world. And then you can kind of check out the description.
Ustedes pueden leer de qué se trata exactamente en la lámina. ¿Ya? Tiene como propósito celebrar la imperfección y los descubrimientos inesperados en una era dominada por los datos, la interminable carrera hacia el aumento de la productividad y la atención curada por algoritmos. Su objetivo principal es permitir que la mente divague, cuestione, explore, juegue y descubra.
So these, like what I do with each book, like each one of these is a book, and they usually have a different theme. So the first theme was kind of like pathological optimist is basically was about whatever you look for, you'll find, you know? And so this wasn't being about being delusional or not recognizing reality, but it's saying that if you have this kind of positive attitude, you actually will attract that and you'll see things in a different light, you know?
El primer libro que hizo este proyecto se llama El optimista patológico, ya que no habla de tener, de estar pensando cosas que no son reales, pero que si uno realmente busca las cosas positivas en el mundo, las va a encontrar.
Yeah, and so another one was I'll talk about the third one, which is if you can't be right, be wrong with confidence, and that was a bit of a joke. It's basically saying that we have access to all this information, all this data, all this consumer insights, and the conclusions that we come to are still wrong. So it's kind of a joke that a lot of people are very confident because they have all this data, but they don't really know what to do with it. So they're still wrong. So this was kind of like a little commentary on some of my work environments.
Ya, nos está hablando del tercer libro que se llama Si no puedes tener razón, equivócate con confianza. Ya, que básicamente hoy en día tenemos muchos datos, muchos estudios y muchas grandes decisiones que se basan en estos datos y estudios, pero que igual terminan estando muchas veces equivocados. Entonces, un poco comentario de cómo podemos, cómo el mundo avanza de esa manera, teniendo muchos datos y mucha información y aún así estando equivocados, pero teniendo mucha confianza al respecto.
And then the pink one was really, it's called La Diferencia es mi superpoder. It's basically about, it's kind of a joke because indifference in English is kind of like saying you don't care about something. But what I'm saying is that we have so many ways of gathering information that it's actually it's changing the ways people create. And I think it's important to not really care about how many likes you get, how many comments you get, and just create, you know, because right now we have this huge feedback loop that we didn't have before that I actually think's impacting the way people create.
Básicamente, bueno, está hablando del último libro que se llama La indiferencia es mi superpoder y cómo tenemos que crear fuera del algoritmo, fuera de los likes, fuera de toda la influencia externa que hoy tenemos, que hoy día mostramos nuestro trabajo a todo el mundo y todo el mundo comenta, todo el mundo opina, todo el mundo se queja o no. Y nuestro superpoder como creadores es tratar de ignorar eso y crear por el interés de crear más allá de por lo que nos diga el resto.
Yep. So the one I'm working right now is called Autopilot. And this kind of goes back to the original thing of living in a different country where it's really important to get off autopilot and realize when you change things up, that's where life really happens, is these unexpected things.
Este libro en el que está trabajando ahora es donde trata de hablar de lo importante que es salir del piloto automático, que hoy en día hacemos muchas cosas de manera automática sin pensarla, y en los momentos en que salimos de esa inercia, ya es cuando realmente creamos y realmente hacemos cosas interesantes.
Yeah, so that's the end of the presentation. So I'm happy to take questions and talk about anything.
Bueno, ese es el fin de la presentación. Muchas gracias y que está feliz de tomar algunas preguntas. ¿Cómo lo hacemos, profe? ¿Sí? Ya voy a ponerlo otra pampanilla. All right, just give me a second. I'm gonna read some comments. Okay, so the question from one of our teachers here He's asking us, you lived in Argentina. What Argentinian illustrators, did you study or do you know?
Yeah, so I would say that the street art in Argentina really resonated with me. There's a group Domo.tv that you might know of. I really liked how they had a sense of humor, and that's another thing in Argentina. In the United States, the graffiti is very political. It's very kind of harsh, you know, and kind of almost angry. Where in Argentina, the street art was really funny, you know. And it was different. So that's one of the things I noticed. And I'll continue to talk, but you can translate that.
Yeah, I would love to, but I think our signal just glitched a little bit. So could you repeat the answer?
Oh yeah. Let me. I'm gonna go outside real quick. Just have a sec. I said one of the very first things I noticed in Argentina was the graffiti, and it's very different than the U.S. because in the U.S. the graffiti seems more angry and political, where in Argentina it was really funny and there was like a lot of jokes and things like that.
Ya, lo que más le llamó la atención en Argentina era los graffiti, ya, por el sentido del humor que tenían, siendo que el graffiti en Estados Unidos es mucho más político, mucho más enojado, ya, tenía mucha más rabia. El graffiti argentino tendía a ser más humorístico, más irónico.
Yeah, a lot of fine artists that I liked in Argentina as well. So like Bernie. Sorry, cut out. What did you say?
Yeah, I know. Okay, you're saying a fine artist, and you mentioned one that I didn't catch.
Yeah, so Bernie was one. I went to the Malba in Argentina, so I saw a lot of artists, and there's definitely some that resonated, and also like the on the bus is like the fileto art.
Okay. Dice los artistas plásticos argentinos le llamaban mucho la atención a uno que se llama Bernie, no lo conozco, y en todo el arte que encontré en el Museo Melba de Buenos Aires. Cool. I don't know if we have any more questions. What are your favorite techniques to work with?
Yeah, so I really like silkscreen, and I like mixing stuff. So I think kind of like low fidelity printing methods, you know, kind of more vintage printing methods. I like accidents. I used to work in a photocopy shop, and I really like that because a lot of the machines didn't work properly, and there was all these surprises that happened. So I think that it's kind of a response to this very kind of refined corporate world that I work in. I kind of like the opposite outside of that when I'm doing kind of art and illustration.
Le gustan las técnicas análogas que generan accidentes o que permiten experimentar. Él cuenta sobre haber trabajado en una tienda donde hacían fotocopia y las fotocopiadoras no funcionaban muy bien. Entonces, él le permitía sacar fotocopias y cosas que no funcionaban bien, tenían resultados gráficos bien interesantes. Entonces, cualquier cosa que permita generar accidentes dentro del proceso le llama la atención. They're asking how long did it take you to get a house with that backyard?
I'm just visiting my brother's house, so this isn't my house, so it'll probably take me a while.
Ya. Que es en la casa del hermano que todavía no ha llegado a ese nivel de patio. What advice would you give us to getting our ideas into paper without trying to hold on so much to realism?
That's a great question. Because I think a lot of artists have that problem. Like when you're young, a good artist is someone who can draw something realistic. And for me, nothing wrong with that, but it's just not interesting to me. I feel like there's so many techniques. There's so many ways to accomplish realism that I think it's very interesting, the human perspective, you know? So I think the one way to not be so precious with your ideas is really just get in the habit of doing a notebook and don't care about results, care about the process. So just say every day I'm going to sketch for 5 minutes, and I don't care. It's going to be a pattern. It's going to be a bird. It's going to be a funny idea, whatever it is. But you just get in the mind. What you do is you get in the mindset of just being confident and just doing what you think rather than worrying about something being good, you know?
Ya, bueno, él habla que cuando uno es chico, un ilustrador es mejor o peor mientras más realista o menos realista sea su trabajo, y eso nunca le llamó demasiado la atención, que a él le interesa la perspectiva de las personas, y lo que él aconseja es tomar un sketchbook y bocetear sin pensar, tratar de bocetear lo más que puedan, de la manera más suelta, y eso los va a llevar a salirse un poco del realismo y plasmar un estilo un poquito más personal.
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit more about that, because I can talk about it from like a creative direction standpoint as well. So if you're in marketing and advertising and stuff like that, there's a very simple thing that you have to do. You have to get a person's attention. You have to communicate a message that then gets them to take an action. You know, that's kind of how marketing works in general, right? So I'll continue. Do you want to translate that part?
Bueno, él quiere hablar un poquito más de la pregunta anterior, vamos a dejar ahí la pregunta de Rodrigo. Él habla que cuando uno trabaja en marketing o en publicidad y con el arte en general, lo que a uno le interesa es agarrar la atención de una persona.
Yeah, so that changes over time. So how you get someone's attention is really the context of whatever people are used to. So if people are used to one thing, it's not going to get their attention. And if you do something different, it is going to get their attention. And that changes literally every 2 years.
Y entonces, cuando la gente se acostumbra a tomar la atención de cierta manera, el público se acostumbra a eso y ya no llama la atención, y eso hay un ciclo de eso como cada 2 años. Entonces hay que ir cambiando la manera de tomar la atención de la gente de manera periódica.
Yeah, so the key is taking people off autopilot. Humans conserve energy. We're programmed to conserve energy, so we don't like to think about, we do stuff out of habit. And when you take people off of autopilot, they notice things. And a lot of things, there's lots of ways to do this. So really, it's just doing something different than expectations. So if you think about, like, say you get a coffee, and instead of, like, you always get sugar in a certain way, and all of a sudden you go to some boutique or some restaurant and they serve the sugar as a cone. That's a way of taking someone off of autopilot. It's a very simple way, but they're used to getting it a certain way, and all of a sudden they notice sugar, like, oh, wow, you know, sugar. It takes them off autopilot.
All right. Due to internet fun, I just got the last part. You were talking about how people receive their coffee and how getting them to a coffee shop can get them to a different place.
Yeah, so
what would you say before that?
I'm saying with marketing and with art, you can kind of create magical moments by not doing expectations. And it can be as simple as changing the shape of a sugar. So say you go to a cafe and you're always used to getting a cube of sugar, and all of a sudden you go to some cafe and the sugar is a cone. That will take people, it'll take them off autopilot, and they'll notice, like, oh, I'm noticing this moment right now.
Básicamente habla que la gente nota cuando hay un cambio, cómo va a ser la manera, o sea, las cosas de manera automática o todos los días. Él nombra el ejemplo de en una cafetería, si lo echo el azúcar en el mismo tipo de paquete todo el tiempo a mi café, ya no me va a sorprender o no me va a cambiar el día, pero en el momento que se cambia ese tipo de azúcar o el paquete del azúcar, eso genera una reacción y la gente como que despierta de cierta manera y lo saca del piloto automático. Hay que tratar de lograr eso.
So the main point about this is not being precious with your ideas. Like I've been on the jury to judge like thousands and thousands of pieces of, like, graphic design and creative, and there's stuff that's designed very well. So I in 2 times in New York, I judged the art directors club. I was on the jury, and I saw thousands and thousands of work that was very well designed, very, very great. but it's not noticeable because that was very common. And the people that did something that was so unique and so different is what you notice. So I think craft is important, but also being unique and understanding the context is very important.
Bueno, él dice que el manejo técnico es súper importante, pero que él ha sido juez de miles de piezas gráficas, ya sea en concursos, sea dentro de una empresa, y lo que llama la atención es lo que se sale de las normas. Cuando la gente tiende a pensar que la proficiencia técnica es súper importante y apuntan a eso, pero la persona que es capaz de hacer algo distinto, que salga de la norma o de lo que conocemos, el que llama la atención y el que normalmente va a tener más foco en su trabajo.
Yeah. And a good exercise to do
one more
is
question,
just for the...
and that should be it.
Okay.
Sorry, I caught you off. Sorry about that.
No. Just one last thing on that. I think a good exercise for people to do is just say in the next week, write down the things that caught your attention and try to understand why.
Dice que un buen ejercicio que pueden hacer la próxima semana es durante toda la semana anotar las cosas que les llamaron la atención y por qué les llamaron la atención. That's pretty great advice. All right, we have one more question. That's what impact have illustration contests have in your career? Have you participated in them? Have you?
Yeah. So I was kind of like starting out, I'm very anti-conformity. Like I really kind of want people to think for themselves and do, so I didn't value that. Like I didn't value contests. I didn't value clients with big names. But that was kind of young and idealistic view on that. And what I realized is like a lot of people that hire you are not artists. They don't know what good art is, what bad art is. They don't know lots of things. You have a marketer that's hiring you. So they're very good for like business reasons because it tells someone that doesn't know, that's not confident. Like, I don't know what good art is or bad art, but they got this award or they have this big client. Therefore, I'm more likely to hire you because now I kind of have some trust in what you do. So I didn't really realize that young, but I do think it is valuable. But it took some time to realize that.
Ya, él dice que cuando él era joven no quería pensar en clientes grandes, ni en concursos, ni cosas así, pero sí dice que es importante tratar de tener cierto nivel de cliente o tratar de ganar ciertos concursos porque eso le dice a las personas que no tienen ni idea de ilustración que ustedes son buenos ilustradores. Entonces, si es que yo me gané tal premio, es que yo trabajé para tal persona, eso hace que una persona que no sepa de ilustración los quiera contratar más por temas de prestigio, por temas de boca a boca, más allá de lo buenos o malos que son ilustrando. Ese es el consejo que él daría.
Yeah, and one last piece of advice on that is
right.
the best
I think
form
that's our time, Nate.
Okay.
Sure. No, go for it. Go for it, please.
No, this is just one last piece of advice. So, the best form of marketing is to work on your work. It's not gaming Instagram. It's not entering contests. It's not any of that. Like that. Yeah, you can do that, but the thing that will get the most work is good work or unique work. So I would put 90% of your effort into your work and only a little percent of effort into that other stuff.
Okay. Básicamente él dice que el mayor consejo que les puede dar es que lo importante acá es hacer buen trabajo y trabajo que los identifique y no preocuparse de los likes o de los clientes o de cuánta gente les pone buenas cosas en Instagram, sino que ustedes trabajen por sí mismos y por lo que les interesa. All right. I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Nate. They're going to clap for you now.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, your awesome work, and for being with us here today.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Okay, I'm going to show you the audio.
Hi, Nate.
Hello.
Just give me a second. Whoop.
Yo era quien te mandaba los mails.
Say hi to Nate.
Hello.
All right, man. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. All right. Ciao.
All right, bye.
Chiquillo, un fuerte aplauso.